My next guest is the co-founder of the campaigning group Us For Them, Molly Kingsley. And the group have been doing some polling which suggests that as we approach the election, both main parties are perceived by the public as lacking honesty and integrity. Kind of like, it's almost a broadcast from the Department of the Blindly Obvious. Who would have thought that no one believes Labour and Conservative? But dig into it for us.
Yeah, I mean, and on some level, the polling confirms what we all probably knew. The voters were at their wits' end, that actually were kind of sick of the lies and the dishonesty. There were a couple of really interesting insights that were gleaned out of it, though. So one of them was that the key driver of how we will vote in the election for most of us is factored around the cost of living, tax rises, the economy. And of
you
that...
like real things for real people?
Real things for real people. And of course, politicians and the mainstream media have been doing their best to attribute that to anything but their own decision and anything but the Ukraine war and the pandemic. And actually, it turns out that a majority of voters see through that. So 60% of people, give or take, see the cost of living crisis, tax rises, the economy as being driven by pandemic debt. Now, that's certainly not something that, we're seeing politicians own up to. Because of that, surprise, surprise, we're losing faith in, politicians and the messages they're giving us. And the other really interesting thing that this polling revealed is that, having come from a place where those of us who had been raising alarm bells about, the speed of the vaccine rollout, possible harms, excess deaths, what was driving that, we were called conspiracy theorists. It's felt like a very lonely place to be for a long time, Neil. You will understand that. Well, it turns out that 50% of us now say we would be more likely to vote for a party that would hold an independent inquiry into excess deaths. That's big, I think, right?
Especially because, with a few honourable exceptions, nobody on the green benches, they all scuttle away into wherever it is they scuttle away to whenever anyone raises the spectre of there's too many people dying.
Yes.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, no, and so we have this odd thing, don't we? We've got the disconnect between what, real people are saying away from the media and maybe in our own homes in the pub, and what the media are talking about, which is, by and large, is very staid party lines, left, right, all on very traditional.
Jasmine, I'm thinking, we were listening to Dr. Claire Craig at the top of the show. The Hope Accord, which is, demanding all sorts of withdrawal of the mRNA products and so on, but also about a return to ethics, a return to integrity within the health profession. It chimes, doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Across the board.
Yes.
In our society, the people are crying out for
honesty,
God's sake, tell us the truth.
Yes, exactly. And I think this also is one of the things that is powering what's called the populist movements, populist parties, because they seem at least to say what the ordinary people are saying and thinking. And as you say, the main parties, wherever you are, in Europe, in the USA, in this country, they are not saying these things. So the media is screaming about sort of far right, etc. But what real people are saying is, at least they are saying what we're thinking, and at least they seem to be sincere. And that's sort of what's being said about Farage, for example, that people say, well, he says it as it is. None of the other parties, or certainly the big parties, are not. So this seems to be what's powering the popularity at the moment.
Molly, what Jasmine's touching on there is what I have begun to wonder. You've been doing polling, and we're hearing, the last thing I looked at said, that Reform might get 18 seats. But I'm wondering if something much, much bigger might be bubbling about. I'm thinking all the way back to the Brexit vote, the biggest plebiscite in history. Is there any indication that, far from a low turnout, there might actually be a lot of people turning out to vote because they've really got a point they want to make? And are we getting anything like the truth from the way the media is covering the run-up to this election?
No, you do wonder, don't you? Because I certainly don't remember another election where there has been so much outrage. People are so angry. And actually, when you're angry, you may stay away from the polls, but I think a lot of people will go and protest vote. And I think it is unfortunate, actually, that we are not seeing more from some of the non-mainstream parties. You know, we have seen a bit from Reform and Farage, but it's been quite limited. And there are other parties there too. I mean, I read the SDP manifesto the other day. It is fantastic. It is brilliant. It is common sense. You know, it has these innovative, grounded policies that actually, were they to happen, would really change this country. Ditto Reform. I don't agree with everything they're saying, but I think they are a breath of fresh air, and I respect their frank talking. And it would be good to see more of them. And yet, you know, particularly the right-wing media, curiously, seem very intent on smearing Farage. And
why? I both of you. Why doesn't someone ride this wave? Do you know? It seems to me that there's such a wave of public fury or indignation, at the very least. And at the moment, the only person who's seeking to harness it is Nigel Farage. It would appear.
Weird.
Why isn't why aren't they all trying to ride this wave? Why can't they do it?
It is an odd one, because I think maybe they're all feeling too small. And what I'm thinking is that we need to get these smaller parties, as you say, to work together. I think together they could ride the wave. They would have the bandwidth to get onto it. But they're all, again, it's like you were saying earlier in the programme, that you've got too many people working against, or organisations working against each other. Whereas if they did it together, they could really ride this wave and make a difference.
And it's interesting we say they, you know, I would say there is no they. Like, no one's going to save us. Like, we need to get active in our own rescue. Like, we need to be riding this wave. And all of us that have been sitting here on our sofas, you know, mouthing off, we need to get involved, and we need to make it happen.
I'm also very aware of, you know, you came into this, or us for them, it's about children. To say they're foundational and fundamental to human life is an understatement. And also, so much of it seems to be coming from people's concern about health. We've been hearing about the Scottish COVID inquiry and the dreadful mistreatment of people in care homes and all of the rest of it. Society has got right down to the basics, hasn't it? You talked about the cost of living crisis, people that can't put food on the table, that can't, they can no longer afford their homes. All of it has got right down to very basic stuff. And yet, floating above it are the two main parties who still seem to be preoccupied with talking a lot of rubbish about things that nobody's interested in.
They do. I mean, actually, you mentioned children, and it's really good you do, because it's interesting how little children have been mentioned in this. And actually, I didn't hear all of the debate from America last night, but the bits I have heard, I haven't heard one mention of the word child. And it's so saddening, because, you know, why are we here as a species if not for our children?
And who took the brunt of everything that happened in the last 4 years in terms of lockdown, in terms of closures of schools and everything else, and isolation from extended family, and everything to do with the products pushed as vaccines and all of the rest of it? It was kids.
It was kids.
And we've had, we've had colleagues of yours on talking about fundamentals that kids can't speak. They can't speak.
And all these hollow promises that during the pandemic were rolled out. I mean, we had, what was it today? There was 1.5 billion has now been written off. Was that right? I don't know if I've got the right figure on PPE. Now, do you remember the education recovery programme that they wouldn't fund? They funded 1.4, and they kind of did it, you know, through gritted teeth and not really wanting to. And you think, really, that was what kids were worth, a load of discarded PPE?
And it does seem to be with political parties, and very much with the Tories, that they are courting the elderly, the older people who are the voters, and just really ignoring the young. As you say, pathetic amounts being put into education, really pathetic. Very little help and support to young people, not just children, but younger people in trying to start their lives, trying to start businesses, trying to start, in the workspace. And so much of this is driven by who's going to vote, and that is generally the older people.
Do you get a sense when you've been the polling, we're being threatened with a poor turnout, or we have been? What do you think? Or are people going to be galvanised against the predictions to get out and vote?
I mean, I hope so. I think you do wonder whether it's been left quite late. And although, Farage, like him or hate him, he certainly galvanised this debate. I suspect there will be people that will be put off reform, actually, because of him. Because, Tice was doing very well, I think many people thought, and, certainly had come up with some quite bold policies. And we seem to be back now to this world of sort of almost cult populism. And that has a downside, and it has a danger. And I think, personally, I would like to see a much greater shake-up of our political duopoly, so that we are talking about new entrants, political parties, new voices, not just a voice. So I think this will be a start, but only a start. And actually, really, we have to look to 2029. And those of us that maybe might end up feeling a bit frustrated by what happens this year.
You never know, though. It could be earlier. And also, though, on the negative side, what I think is a negative is I am coming across quite a lot of people who are ideologically not going to vote because they don't believe in the whole system now. It's not just Conservative, Labour, Reform, SDP, whatever. It's just the whole alleged democratic system. They see that as something that has just had its day.
That's where I am.
Well, understandably,
I just feel as if it's a toxic goldfish bowl, and I don't want anything to do with it. The whole thing just feels poisoned and corrupted to me. It's like, just get rid of that.
And so then what would you do? What about if we had a candidate here like Kennedy in America, say, who is preparing to take that on?
Yes. Well, I mean, I find I don't agree with everything that he says. I'm frustrated by his, taking that, the stance that he's taken just about, Israel always right, everybody else always wrong. And I thought, oh God, could there not just have been a candidate finally that would have handled that in the way that so many people feel that enough's enough. But I'm preoccupied with the family. I'm preoccupied with kids. To get back to that. I have people on here all the time talking about we're not replacing ourselves. The birth rates and fertility and all of the rest of it are through the floor. Where is the party that will prioritise kids and family?
SDP, it's there. So, I mean, read their manifesto, I would say that. And they have a provision in their manifesto which is every policy to be looked at through the lens of its impact on family life. They also have a whole load of sensible things like tax credits for families. They have, I think they're saying, 3 days working from home for parents with kids under the age of 5. That there'll be business contingents that kind of look at that and say, oh, it's not very business and bad for the city. Absolutely brilliant for families, life-changing for those of us with young kids.
I would be all about that. I would listen. My ears would prick up right away if somebody said everything about making and raising a family is going to be made easier. That's where the tax benefits are going to be. That's where all of the incentives are going to go. And I can't think of anyone in my vicinity that wouldn't be all over that.
Yeah, quite. And
it's a no-brainer.
It is, and I do think this is where the two main parties have completely detached themselves from reality. And the good thing about this, I'm hearing the SDP manifesto and the Reform manifesto, and certainly the Heritage Party, is that they are for families, and that's what most people want. Even if you haven't got a family, you like family values, supporting marriage.
Reform is very good on that as well, isn't it? And also for culture and for our heritage, I think all of them.
And then you've got other parties that don't know what a woman is and, are all for transgender. There's this sort of tiny minority of people who are not really, this is not what most people care about and want. And for them is important. It is, as you say, the cost of living crisis. It's the breakup of family units, not enough support for family, all of these things. And basic honesty and integrity. And again, family values tend to say to me, honesty, integrity, basic Judeo-Christian values, which we all really fundamentally want. Even if you're not a churchgoer and you don't believe in it, you want those values at least.
To change the subject slightly, but I've had your colleagues in talking about the impact of technology on kids, and up to and including the fact that it's impairing the uptake of learning to speak. That's another fundamental as well. I go about all the time now watching people in that posture with their phones. I'm as guilty as anyone of it. But you realise that everyone is doing it. We have made ourselves addicted to something that's more addictive than nicotine, more addictive than cocaine. This is the one, this tech, and yet what have we done? We've given it to 3-year-olds, or some people have.
And we try and complain, we try and say but it's their right to have a phone. It's their right to be on social media. I mean, it's very odd, the kind of mental gymnastics that people do to justify the decision. There's some very interesting polling, actually, that's been done on this, not by us, but what it shows is that a vast majority of parents who haven't already given their kids smartphones are against children having smartphones and are pro an outright ban effectively on smartphones. Of course, for the parents that have already given the kids a smartphone, it is still a majority, but it's a much less persuasive majority who would support a restriction. But again, this is one of those things, like, the answer is there. It is obvious. We just need bold politicians to do it. We don't have to ban children from having all phones. We just need a licensed product that is safe and is stripped back. Like, this is not rocket science, and it just needs to happen. But we need politicians who are prepared to, like, rock things up a bit.
And also, sorry, as you were saying, we need us individually to step up to the plate, ultimately, because
we do.
Let's be honest, politicians are human beings like us. There's only so much they can do, even the good ones. So we individually need to start moving and shaking and taking things into our own hands, because it's amazing what can be done from grassroots.
It is, absolutely. There's a great movement, actually, the smartphone-free childhood movement, who are doing really, really great things in this space. And it just shows how much parents do care about this.
The extent, it seems to me, to which the main political parties certainly have just simply, somehow or other, taken their eye off of everything that real people care about. And they've drifted away from the rest of there's 650 of them, and they have just drifted off into some sort of nether kingdom where the things they care about have no bearing on the lives of people.